You're terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you out. She didn't even look up from her brand new laptop when she said it, still typing in her Slack password. Day one on the job and already playing executioner. Her name was Vanessa, daughter-in-law of Richard Sterling, the founder of Sterling and Associates. And me? I'm Elena Vance, and according to Vanessa, I just became history. She had that blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, a Chanel suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and the kind of confidence you only get when you've never been told no in your entire life. Behind her stood some junior HR guy, shaking like a chihuahua in a thunderstorm, looking like he was watching someone defuse a bomb with a spatula. The ink on her onboarding packet was still wet, and she was already swinging the axe. I didn't argue, didn't explain, didn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. I just stood up, straightened my jacket, and set my badge on the desk with the kind of grace you learn after 30 years of swallowing power plays and grinding through boardroom egos. 30 years of watching people like her come and go. 30 years of knowing exactly when to speak and when to stay silent. All I said was, "All right, but do me a favor. Tell your father-in-law the board meeting in 3 hours should be interesting." Her fingers stopped moving on the keyboard. Just for a second, a tiny crack in that perfect facade. Then I walked out, past the trembling HR rep who couldn't even meet my eyes, past the security guard who looked more confused than concerned, like he wasn't sure if he should be escorting me out or apologizing, past the framed photo of the Sterling family in the lobby, the one that conveniently left out the woman who actually wrote the bylaws this whole empire was built on. That woman was me, by the way, but we'll get to that. Vanessa thought she just fired me, thought this was her big power move, her first scalp on the wall. She was probably already drafting that LinkedIn post in her head. #leadership, #tough decisions, #girlboss. What she actually did was trigger a time bomb I planted 15 years ago, and she had no idea it was already ticking. Now, if you're already hooked on this corporate chaos, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and drop a like. Not because I'm begging, trust me, I've been kicked out of nicer offices than this, but it really helps the team keep digging up these stories and exposing what really happens behind those glass doors. You'd be surprised how often the person getting fired is the one holding all the cards. All right, back to our regularly scheduled downfall. To understand what's really going on here, you need to know who I am, not the version in the employee directory, the real version. Back in 1994, when Richard Sterling had nothing but an idea, a dream, and a leaky garage in New Jersey, I was the one who believed in him. I was a corporate attorney back then, young but already making a name for myself. Richard was my client. He came to me with this wild plan to revolutionize supply chain logistics. Most people would have laughed him out of the room. I wrote him a check instead. $250,000. Every single penny I'd saved from my years of 80-hour weeks and cold coffee dinners. My entire safety net gone in one signature. In exchange, I got 40% of the company. Richard was never good with the legal stuff. Numbers made his eyes glaze over. Contracts put him to sleep. He was a visionary, a people person, the kind of guy who could sell you a dream before you'd finished your morning coffee. He could walk into a room full of skeptics and walk out with investors fighting to give him money. Me, I was good at the boring stuff, the stuff that actually keeps a company alive. Contracts, clauses, corporate governance, the fine print nobody ever bothers to read until it's too late. While Richard was out there being the face of the company, shaking hands and closing deals, I was in the back room making sure none of those deals would blow up in our faces. We made a good team, for a while. As the company grew, Richard needed more capital. Expansion costs money. Hiring costs money. That shiny new headquarters with the marble lobby and the artisanal coffee bar, that definitely costs money. Every funding round, Richard's stake got diluted. He'd give up a little piece here, a little piece there, always chasing the next milestone. But mine? I kept buying more. Not under my own name, though. That would have been way too obvious, and I'd learned a long time ago that in business, visibility is vulnerability. I set up a holding company called Eastbrook Partners. On paper, it looked like some anonymous investment fund registered in Delaware, just another faceless entity in a sea of faceless entities. Nobody gave it a second glance. Nobody, not even Richard, knew that Eastbrook was actually me. Every time an early investor wanted to cash out, Eastbrook was there with a fair offer. Every time the company issued new shares, Eastbrook quietly picked up what it could. Every time someone needed liquidity, Eastbrook had the checkbook ready. Over 20 years, share by share, point by point, Eastbrook Partners accumulated a controlling stake in Sterling and Associates. By the time Vanessa walked into my office with her designer heels and her termination speech, Eastbrook Partners owned 72% of the company, and Eastbrook Partners is me. 72%. Let that sink in for a second. That's not a minority stake. That's not even a majority stake. That's total control. That's I can fire the entire board if I want to control. That's the only vote that matters control. Why did I hide it for so long? Because I knew someday someone like Vanessa would show up. Someone who thinks power is something you're handed, not something you build. Someone who looks at a company and sees a trophy instead of a responsibility. Someone who would try to tear down everything I helped create just because they could. And I wanted an escape hatch, a failsafe, a way to take back what was mine if things ever went sideways. Turns out I was right to plan ahead. Let me tell you about Vanessa, because understanding her is understanding everything that happened next. She met Marcus, Richard's only son, at some charity gala in the Hamptons 3 years ago, one of those events where people paid $10,000 a plate to feel good about themselves while waiters in white gloves serve champagne that cost more than a used car. Vanessa came from old money, and I mean old money. The kind of old money that has a family crest and a summer estate with a name. The kind of old money that sends their kids to boarding schools in Switzerland and expects them to marry into other old money families. The problem was that Vanessa's old money had run out a long time ago. The family name was still there, but the bank accounts were empty. The estate had been sold off piece by piece. The trust fund was a joke. All Vanessa had left was the accent, the connections, and a desperate need to find someone else's fortune to attach herself to. She looked at Marcus Sterling like a golden ticket, an only child set to inherit an $800 million company, a sweet, trusting guy who believed in love and family and all that romantic nonsense. A meal ticket for life. They got married after 8 months of dating. Big ceremony, covered in the society pages. Richard gave a speech about legacy and the future of the Sterling family. I watched from the back of the room and kept my mouth shut. Marcus loved Vanessa, really genuinely loved her. He was the kind of guy who still believed in fairy tales at 32 years old. He saw the best in everyone, including a woman who was clearly using him as a stepping stone. It was sweet. It was naive. Honestly, it was kind of heartbreaking. And Richard? He was completely blind when it came to his new daughter-in-law. She knew exactly how to play him. A compliment here, a thoughtful question there, always knowing when to speak up and when to stay demurely silent. She made him feel like the patriarch of a dynasty, like he was building something that would last for generations. He ate it up. When Vanessa casually mentioned that she wanted to contribute to the family business, to really be a part of the Sterling legacy, Richard practically tripped over himself saying yes. She has an MBA from Wharton, he told the board. She'll bring fresh perspective. Yeah, the MBA she failed accounting twice to get. The MBA she only finished because her family name still carried enough weight to get her a few extra chances. So sure, Richard, fresh perspective. He created a brand new position for her, Chief Strategy Officer, a title that never existed before at Sterling and Associates, invented specifically so there'd be somewhere fancy to put his son's wife. She got the corner office, the executive assistant, the company card with the high limit, all the trappings of power without any of the substance behind it. And from day one, I was in her crosshairs. Why me? Why was she her first target? Because I was the only person in that company who didn't bow and scrape when she walked by. I didn't compliment her outfits, I didn't laugh at her jokes, I didn't nod along enthusiastically when she made suggestions in meetings that showed she had absolutely no idea how the business actually worked. I was polite, professional, but I didn't perform for her. And people like Vanessa, people who've spent their whole lives being told how special they are, they can't stand someone who sees through the act. More than that, I was dangerous. I'd been with the company since the beginning. I knew where all the bodies were buried, metaphorically speaking. I had relationships with every major investor, every key client, every person who actually mattered. I couldn't be easily replaced, and I couldn't be bought. In Vanessa's mind, that made me an obstacle, and obstacles get removed. What she didn't understand, what she couldn't possibly understand, was that I'd been preparing for. Speaking of which, this morning you terminated me without a formal vote of this board. Without any vote, actually. Just walked into my office and told me I was fired. I was authorized, Vanessa said, but her voice was shaking now. My father-in-law gave me full authority to make personnel decisions. Your father-in-law doesn't have the authority to delegate that power, I said. Not according to the shareholder agreement, not for senior executives, and certainly not to someone who doesn't own a single share of this company. I pulled out a highlighted copy of Clause 17C and slid it across the table. This clause states that any termination of a senior executive without board approval initiated by a non-shareholder triggers an immediate suspension of that person's authority. It also triggers an emergency board session, which is what's happening right now, and it reverts all voting power to the majority shareholder. I paused to let that sink in. That would be me. I own 72%. I am the majority shareholder. As of this moment, I control this company. Vanessa shot to her feet. This is a setup. You planned this whole thing. You tricked me into firing you so you could take over. I shook my head. I didn't trick you into anything. That clause has been in the shareholder agreement for 15 years. It's been reviewed by lawyers, auditors, everyone. You could have read it at any time. You chose not to. You assumed you could do whatever you wanted because you married the founder's son. I kept my voice calm, steady, almost gentle. That wasn't a mistake, Vanessa. That was a choice, and every choice has consequences. Marcus stood up then. His face was red, his hands were shaking. He looked like a man watching his whole world fall apart. Elena, he said, you can't do this to us, to my wife, to my family. We trusted you. For a moment, I actually felt sorry for him. Marcus was never a bad person, just naive, just too willing to see the good in people who didn't have any good to see. Marcus, I said softly, I've known you since you were a kid running around this office. I watched you grow up. I don't want to hurt you, but your wife, on her very first day in this building, tried to fire someone who's been here since before you were born. Not because I did anything wrong, not because there was any legitimate reason, just because I didn't kiss up to her, just because I saw through her act. I looked at Vanessa. That's not leadership. That's not tough decisions. That's just cruelty wearing a power suit. The room was completely silent. Nobody moved. Nobody even seemed to breathe. I turned back to the board. Here's what's going to happen now. As majority shareholder, I'm calling for an immediate vote to remove Vanessa Sterling from all positions within this company. Anyone in favor? One by one, hands went up around the table. Even people who'd been Richard's allies for years. Even people who'd smiled and congratulated Vanessa that very morning. That's how it works in business. When the power shifts, loyalty shifts with it. Motion carries, I said. Vanessa Sterling is hereby removed from her position as Chief Strategy Officer effective immediately. She will be escorted from the building and her access credentials will be revoked. Vanessa looked like she wanted to scream, to throw something, to attack me right there in the boardroom. But she didn't. She just stood there, fists clenched, face twisted with rage, as security finally stepped forward. "This isn't over," she hissed. "You'll regret this." "Maybe," I said, "but not today." After Vanessa was escorted out, the room slowly cleared. People gathered their things, whispered to each other, carefully avoiding making eye contact with Richard. The founder of Sterling and Associates sat alone at the conference table, staring at nothing. I could have left, probably should have left, but something made me stay. Elena. His voice was broken, hollow. I sat down across from him. Same table where we'd shared so many victories over the years, same view of the city we'd both helped build. Why? He asked. Why didn't you tell me? All these years, I thought we were partners. We were partners. We are partners. That's why I did what I did. He looked at me, confused, hurt. You don't understand what it's been like, I said. Watching you over these last few years, watching you hand over more and more control to people who haven't earned it. First, it was that consulting firm that nearly bankrupted us. Then it was those bad investments. And now this, your daughter-in-law, Richard, a woman who's been with the company for 1 day, and her first act is to try to fire your oldest friend. He flinched at that. Oldest friend. I wonder if he even remembered that's what we used to call each other back in the garage days. I needed leverage, I continued. I needed a way to step in if things ever went too far, if you ever made a decision that would destroy everything we built. So I created Eastbrook, not to take over, not to steal the company from you, just to have a safety net, a way to hit the brakes if the car was heading off a cliff. You could have told me. If I'd told you, you would have seen it as a threat. You would have pushed me out. And then who would have been here to catch you when you fell? He didn't have an answer for that. I was going to step back, he said finally. Let Marcus and Vanessa take over, build their own legacy. I know, that's exactly why I waited. I knew eventually Vanessa would do something like this. People like her always do. They can't help themselves. They're so convinced they're special, so certain the rules don't apply to them, that they inevitably cross a line. I leaned forward. I didn't set a trap, Richard. I just knew what kind of person she was, and I knew that eventually she'd show everyone else, too. So what happens now? What do you want? I want you to step down, voluntarily. You keep your shares, you keep your dignity, you keep your legacy intact. You announce that you're retiring for personal reasons, and I take over as executive chair. The company continues, your name stays on the building. Everyone wins. And if I don't, then we do this the hard way. I own 72%, Richard. You own 28%. If this goes to a shareholder vote, we both know how it ends. But I don't want that. I've never wanted that. I just want to protect what we built together. He was quiet for a long time. I could see him running through the options in his head, looking for a way out, a way to save face, a way to undo what had been done. There wasn't one. What about Vanessa? He asked finally. She never sets foot in any company I'm connected to ever again. That's non-negotiable. And Marcus? That's a family matter. I'll leave that to you. Richard nodded slowly. He looked exhausted, defeated, older than I'd ever seen him. She's going to destroy my family, he said quietly. My son loves her. Your son will survive. He's stronger than you think. And maybe without her influence, he'll finally grow into the man you always wanted him to be. Richard looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. Recognition, understanding, maybe even respect. You always were the smartest person in the room, he said. I wasn't trying to be smart. I was just trying to be ready. I stood up and gathered my things. You'll have the formal resignation letter by tomorrow morning. I'll make sure the transition is smooth. And Richard, for what it's worth, I really am sorry it came to this. I really am. He didn't respond, just sat there staring at the table as I walked out of the room. The next morning, the building felt different. Not louder, not quieter, just more real, like someone had peeled back the wallpaper and found the original blueprint underneath. The pretense was gone. The games were over. What remained was just the truth, plain and simple. Richard's resignation email went out at 8:55. After many wonderful years building this company, I have decided to step down for personal reasons. I have full confidence in the board and shareholders to guide Sterling and Associates into its next chapter. Short, professional, completely devoid of emotion. Exactly what you'd expect from a man who just lost everything he thought he had. Nobody replied to the email. What was there to say? Vanessa showed up at 8:57. I wasn't there to see it, but I heard about it later from about a dozen different people, all telling the same story. She came in wearing a gray blazer and flat shoes. No designer heels this time, no power ponytail. She looked smaller somehow, deflated, like someone had let all the air out of her. Dark circles under her eyes told the story. She hadn't slept. Probably spent the whole night screaming at Marcus, calling lawyers, trying to find some way to reverse what had happened. There wasn't one. Her badge didn't work when she tried to scan in at the front door. The little light flashed red and the turnstile stayed locked. A security guard approached her, polite, professional, almost apologetic. He'd been told to expect her. He'd been told exactly what to say. "Ma'am, I'm afraid your access has been revoked. I've been asked to escort you off the premises." She didn't fight it. I think part of her knew it was coming. She just handed her badge, her company phone, and the keys to an office she'd occupied for less than 24 hours. As they walked her through the lobby, she looked up at the big digital display near the elevators, the one that used to scroll through photos of the executive team, their names and titles in glossy animation. It had already been updated. Sterling and Associates, Executive Chairwoman Elena Vance, appointed by majority shareholder. No photo, just the title. I never liked having my picture up on those things anyway. The security guard walked her all the way to the front door, held it open for her, even said, "Have a nice day."